Hey, what's going on guys? Arekkz here. Welcome back to another video for Godfall, and today I want to talk about a few interesting gameplay elements, bits of information that recently surfaced in a Gamespot interview with Godfall director Keith Lee. In that they spoke about various different aspects in the game, but they also spoke a little bit more in depth about progression, some of the loot aspects, some of the things that you'll be fighting, quest structure, and also gave us a better idea as to how the combat might feel, because obviously up until this point none of us have played it and everyone's like, you know, where does it land? Is it more like Devil May Cry? Is it more like Dark Souls? That kind of thing. So this should shed a little bit of light on that. Of course, I'll link the original interview in the description box down below if you guys want to read it in its entirety. But if you enjoyed this video, then a like would be super appreciated, and be sure to keep it locked because we've got plenty more exciting Godfall stuff coming your way very soon. Anyway, with that being said, one of the first things they spoke about was trying to sort of paint a picture as to where this game falls in the kind of whole sort of game genre, so to speak, and where you place it if you're trying to sort of, you know, understand how it would play. So they said that the vision for this game was always to merge looting with third-person melee combat. They wanted to really focus on getting like really juicy, tight combat mechanics, that sort of moment-to-moment flow and that experience, because a lot of people on the Counterplay team love those kind of skill-based action titles, those kind of ones where, you know, it's definitely more so about player skill, it's not just about having that hefty level where you can just lay waste to things because you're level 57, you know, that kind of thing. However, they did also say that there are people on the team, given their background, that have worked on Diablo, working at Blizzard. They said they also love other loot-driven RPGs, they've played Borderlands, things like that. So they said the original premise was basically to create a game that falls somewhere in the middle, meaning it was one part loot-driven as well as one part skill-driven. And it's much more about the intrinsic mastery of the combats, while loot is more of kind of an extrinsic reward system for you to be motivated to play the game. So definitely one of those things where obviously loot is important, but player skill is, by the sounds of it, going to be kind of the presiding factor, which is cool, you know, definitely. For those of us that like these kind of games, for those of you that kind of enjoy those action combat games, should definitely lean more towards that side of things. But again, loot is important, because Keith Lee also said in the interview that mastering Godfall's broad combat system is going to be a big part of the experience, but searching for more and better loot will equally also be a part of the experience. It comes back to the Valor Plates, which we've spoken about in previous videos, the armor at the core of Godfall's gameplay. There are 12 Valor Plates, which, you know, at the moment we know of, I believe, 4 of them. If you guys haven't seen that, you can check out my previous video on the ones we know about so far. And each of those Valor Plates has its own specific set of stats, a passive buff for your character, and an Archon ability. And Archon abilities basically sound kind of like supers and ultimates, so think, you know, if you're playing Destiny, it would be your ultimate. If you're playing other games like Overwatch, your supers, that kind of thing. Basically, a special ability that you will, you know, probably have on some kind of long cooldown, and we've probably seen those in some of the gameplay. Again, I kind of touched on what they could probably look like in the Valor Plate video that I did. And they said that because of the different stats and the different Archon abilities that each Valor Plate offers, you can kind of see that they function a little bit like classes. Obviously, you know, you're not going to be bound to one of them. You can change them out, you can adjust your loadouts, but when you do have them on, you'll kind of see them like classes. In terms of progression, your character has an overall level that you will increase as you play, and rather than leveling up your individual Valor Plates, instead increasing your level unlocks skill points that you can then allocate on a skill grid that will give you new abilities. Now, they didn't specify in the interview whether those skill grids are specific to Valor Plates, which, you know, the phrasing makes it sound that it might not be, because they said you obviously don't level up Valor Plates, but at the same time they do also lend you new abilities. So that's one kind of thing that I want to get a little bit of clarity on. But, you know, basically there's a skill grid, you can spend points in it to unlock skills, and as in other loot-driven action RPGs, you will find stronger weapons as you play, and you'll need to keep increasing your level in order to access them. They do say, of course, if you find weapons that you like in particular, you can use crafting materials to increase their power by upgrading them in the 7th Sanctum, which is your character's home base. So now we have confirmation that crafting also exists. So it may well be some of the items we've seen dropping in some of the gameplay might have been loot, but the other items may also have been crafting items. Keith Lee then wanted to say that chasing loot in Godfall is perhaps a little bit less about always looking for something that is better in terms of numbers, but it's more so about finding things that customize your loadout to better match how you want to play. And again, that kind of lends itself to the skill-based aspect of it, because of course, you know, you're not just looking for arbitrary number increases that just allow you to slash your way through new enemies. If it is, of course, much more skill-based, it would be kind of more akin to, I don't know, maybe gearing up in Monster Hunter to a degree, where you're picking skills that, you know, complement your playstyle and allow you to do certain things, versus just being like, I just need to stack something higher level. In fact, I actually made that Monster Hunter comparison, but they specifically said in the interview you, from their perspective, they're less worried about generating an infinite number of combinations, but more thinking about loot a little bit like Monster Hunter World or like God of War, where loot is a little bit more specific. He said, but then each loot piece is very meaningful or impactful if you slot it into your Valor Plate and if you get a very specific weapon. So that's been one of the big differences. It's focusing more so on quality as opposed to infinite quantity, which honestly I think is really cool, because it's one thing to say, hey, this game has 5 million swords. You know, it's cool, right? Like, you take Borderlands as an example. Fantastic game, there are plenty of loot options, and it is really cool to see like umpteen different versions of weapons. But on the flip side, it can sometimes be a little bit daunting. You look at things and you're just like, all right, this is 2 points better than my thing before. Do I swap it out? Whereas when you get something that is slightly more meaningful, you know, it drops and you're like, this is what I've been waiting for. This very specific item changes my build, changes the way that I play. That is really what is, I mean, for me personally, that's the kind of thing that I enjoy more so, because I feel like I'm less worried about chasing like that 0.2% just to make myself ever so incrementally better. I'm more so just about like, yes, this is the cool sword that I want. And of course, Lee then went on to say that the focus on meaningful loot pairs with Godfall's focus on melee combat, and they actually said when you're kind of looking for a comparison, it would be much more like either 2019's God of War or Devil May Cry 5, as opposed to something like a Soulsborne game. Yes, of course you have parry mechanics, which those games do, but it's definitely much more of an action combat game than, say, the kind of Soulsborne style game. They said the way they've designed their combat pillars was that they wanted to start designing combat in a way that offense is basically greater than defense. They said they wanted to really focus on the player feeling that kind of offensive power fantasy. So they said if you kind of think about most, say, Soulsborne games, you're much more defensive, meaning that you want to isolate yourself and then kind of, you know, focus on that one-on-one combat. It's a lot more sort of disadvantageous to go into kind of a 2-on-1 fight. Yes, I know there are those god tier players that can just take on everything, but principally that's kind of the way you engage, right? You know, you pick off your enemies and you kind of do them one at a time. It's much more systematic. However, they said that for them, they wanted you to feel like you can really dominate and completely eviscerate your enemies in, you know, a way that is much more akin to God of War or Devil May Cry. You just go in and because you're skillful, because you've got the combos, you can just lay waste to hordes of enemies. And they said that that is much more the focus for Godfall, to kind of give you that power fantasy. They said for that reason, they've got a much broader spectrum of enemies, more variety, and as a result, they embrace that many-to-one combat system. They said the idea is that in Godfall, you're always pushing forward, prioritizing your enemies and leaning into your attack. They said that you will still face tough one-on-one fights, but, you know, that is kind of the idea behind it. Godfall is said to be divided into missions that you'll choose from the Seventh Sanctum, which again is your home base, along with your loadout, and story missions are going to have mid and end bosses that you'll face as you advance throughout the story. But they then said they also have hunt missions, which actually to me sounds really exciting. This sounds much more akin to Monster Hunter. They said hunt missions will send you out to track down, learn about, and face bosses in particular. So expect some very big fights that are different to the many against one battles that you'll have along the story. They said that going after and taking down bosses is one of the big structural elements of Godfall, and you can expect a whole lot of them, and story missions have their own set of bosses. So it sounds like they're going to be different, which again is quite cool because, you know, it's quite common in these kind of games to be like, hey, there's a boss fight, but it's also something you just already fought in a story mission, just in a isolated setup. So to hear that they've got different bosses for hunts than they do for story missions actually sounds incredibly exciting. And for the time being, that is pretty much it. That's for the most part what they touched on in the interview. So lots of exciting stuff there. Kind of top level is that, you know, combat-wise, we can look at it more so like God of War and Devil May Cry. When it comes to loot progression, we're looking much more at meaningful items, so quality over quantity. And of course, when we look to mission structure, we have, you know, the story stuff, as well as hunt missions, which are those kind of big boss chasing elements. So that definitely sounds really exciting for me, honestly. So yeah, for the time being, that's it. But as mentioned, if you're excited for Godfall, definitely make sure you stick around. Definitely make sure you turn those notifications because we have got some exciting Godfall stuff coming your way very soon. So definitely you don't want to miss it. Thanks so much for watching, guys. I hope you enjoyed that video. Don't forget, if you haven't already done so, you can join the Arekkz Gaming Discord. We've got an awesome community over there with so many different channels for you to chat loads of different topics and different games. I'm in there, the team's in there if you guys want to chat with us, find people to play with. It's just in general a great place to be. And of course, if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to turn on those notifications so you don't miss any of our future uploads.